This is Evolutionary Radio. We got a really exciting guest for you guys. Joining us today is Dr. Daniel Pompa. He's someone who I would consider an expert in functional medicine. He has an extremely interesting story about how this all started for him. So Dr. Daniel Pompa, why don't we start off the show by you telling us your history? It will come best coming straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, I've been called worse. But you know, the story is a pain to purpose story. You know, I always say I didn't choose what I teach now, and I'm blessed to teach hundreds of doctors around the world my protocols. But it all came out of my own story. It did. You know, it was around 1999, 2000, and I had a huge functioning practice, and life was really good. Two young boys at the time. I was actually probably in the best shape of my life. I was racing bikes at that time at the expert level. All good. And then it started with simple fatigue, probably like most people listening and watching this. And then it went to anxiety, and then it went to insomnia, panic attacks, sound sensitive. I became allergic to everything I was eating. I mean, literally, life as I know it came to a screeching halt. So it wasn't a good time. I mean, at that time, two young boys, and I couldn't even handle them crying. I tell my wife to take them out. I couldn't handle it. My adrenals were shot. My thyroid was going, although my blood work was normal. You know, I searched around for 4 years. When I had insomnia, I would dig at studies. I was good at reading them, but I just couldn't figure it out. One day I found Mad Hatter's disease, and I don't know if you recall what that is, but people making felt hats were using mercury as part of the process, and they became mercury poisoned. I had every symptom. So of course I got my mercury tested, but I did a blood test, came out negative. It was a little over a year later. I was working with an endocrinologist because my thyroid and adrenals were shot. And he said to me one day, you know, Dan, I think you have mercury toxicity. I said, I thought so too. And I did a blood test and came out normal. He said, oh, that's the wrong test. That'd be if you had acute mercury poisoning, like people making felt hats or getting poisoned every day. If you do have it, I think it's chronic. So I did a different test where you chelate it out of your tissues, and then you're able to measure it in the urine. And it came out where I had lead, mercury, and it showed positive. So my next question was, where do you think I got it? He said, do you have any dental work done around when this all happened? And I said, maybe, you know, because these fillings cracked. So I called my dentist, who's one of my good friends. And sure enough, shortly after that, the fatigue started. I just never put it together. Those fillings, those silver fillings, contain 50% mercury, as I found out later. But, you know, years, it was just bioaccumulating. That mercury vapor comes off, and it was bioaccumulating in my brain. And then, you know, I had other sources along the way. Contact lens fluid, the saline solution in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s had mercury in it as well, thimerosal. And that was a factor, you know. I was a big fish eater at one time, so that was a factor. The bottom line is my bucket overflowed and all the symptoms started. And that led me on my journey. How do I get this out of my body and brain safely? And everything I teach today literally came out of that story.
Let me go back to the dental thing, because, you know, dental work is one of the things that in modern society we all do, and we all have fillings. You know, you go to the dentist, he's going to be like, yeah, you have a cavity, you need a filling. So is it safe to assume that all of us have fillings that have mercury based on what you're saying? Is that something how do we know if we do, and how do we know if our dentist is putting mercury in our mouth?
Yeah, that's a great question. If the filling's dark, whether it's silver, black, dark color, then it's probably an amalgam filling, which has 50% mercury. If it's white, then it's not. So composite fillings are really what the industry is moving towards. And they don't have mercury, or it's a porcelain filling, which is probably the best of all fillings, which they don't have mercury. So many safe options today, but unfortunately, when we were growing up, that's all they used is silver fillings. And
I got to run to the mirror right now and check my mouth. I don't know if you guys could see. If you could check, we got to check to see if I have any dark. But that's funny because my dentist actually does the white porcelain. And so I've had those my whole life. So that's good.
You know, the dental thing is a big deal. You know, there's a movie out right now that actually was pulled off of Netflix, but you can go and watch this movie if you go to rootcausemovie.com. I get nothing for sending anyone anywhere there. It's an amazing documentary, rootcausemovie.com. And it talks a little bit about this, but it also talks about hidden infections in the mouth. And look, I still have clients from all over the world. I still keep my hand in helping very sick and challenged people, which I love to do. I mean, if I'm teaching, I have to still be in it to some degree. So many of these unexplainable illnesses and people that just aren't getting well, can't get well, been everywhere, done everything, it's hidden infections or amalgam illness, heavy metal toxicity. But hidden infections, and what I mean by that is root canals. They all carry anaerobic bacteria and other infections in and around these root canals. And also where you've had wisdom teeth or teeth extracted, it'll heal over, but there's an infection 88% of the time in where a wisdom tooth was extracted. There's an infection under there. That's called a cavitation. So the documentary was actually done on this. I interviewed one of the top dentists in the country. He's from New York on my podcast. And we talked about the proper way to identify if you have these and also how to remove them. But I can tell you, a lot of people with unexplainable illnesses, it's coming from the mouth in some fashion, hidden sources.
Really, really interesting, Dr. Daniel Pompa. One question I had for you is that, especially this being a health and fitness podcast, most people listening to this podcast have probably eaten a decent amount of tuna in their life. So when you were talking about heavy metal poisoning, the first thought that came to my mind was mercury. That urine test you got done, is that a simple test? Is that if they went to their family doctor, could they get that test done?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Most family doctors would say, okay, we'll do a blood test because that's what they know, but that's only showing acute poisoning. And unfortunately, their method, even if they did a blood test and saw you had high blood, getting an acute poisoning, meaning you're working in a factory, you're getting exposed every day because mercury's only in the blood maybe 2 days, and then it's pushed into deeper tissue. And that's where we have to test for it. So they wouldn't do that test. You'd have to go to a functional medicine doctor. Look, I train doctors all over the country. They're Health Centers of the Future is the name of my seminars, and Health Center of the Future doctors now are spreading around the country and the world. But they do the proper test where we take an agent that grabs on to these metals. It's called a chelator, and then it pulls it out, and then we measure it in the urine. And a functional medicine doctor would do the proper test.
I mean, you're obviously more educated on this than I am, but as in terms of supplements or dietary interventions to try to detoxify your bodies of heavy metals, I know of humic and fulvic acids. Would there be anything else you would recommend?
Yeah, humates and fulvic acids are in a product that I developed called Bind. Now that product is meant just to stay in the gut. And we use other products to help upregulate cell function and move toxins out of the body. We use another product called cytodetox to move toxins from the cell out of the body. But many of the toxins end up in the liver and they bind to bile, and then bile is dumped in the gut. We want to catch that. Otherwise, you auto-intoxicate. You reabsorb the toxins connected to bile. The reason is because your body's designed to reabsorb bile back to the liver, and it brings the toxins around. So we use a product that I call Bind that has humates and fulvic acids in it, but they don't leave the gut very well, and we don't want them to. So because we want that to sit in the gut as a catcher's mitt. Here's the problem with humates and fulvic acid. It took us a long time to find a clean source. Even still, every batch that comes in from that product we test, because they're contaminated with lead, arsenic, and other heavy metals. To be very careful of your sources on those things. And other things like Chlorella, it's a weak binder. People look at Chlorella as it's a metal magnet. Not really. It's more of a weak binder and can actually redistribute metal. Any binder, whether it's clays, carbons, you have to test those because most of them are in fact contaminated. So there's a big caution there. But look, real detox has to go to the cell. You have to upregulate cell function. And when people are toxic, that's the problem. The cell that's designed to get toxins out of itself all day long, and you have 70 trillion of these things, when that starts to shut down, I don't care what you do down here, you have to get the cell moving toxins from itself. That's how we get sick people well.
It's really, really fascinating. And what you said about testing the ingredients is really important, especially, a lot of these imported ingredients from China, things like spirulina, ashwagandha, a lot of them, if you're third-party testing them, they're laced with heavy metals and things.
Yes. It's really, when you're looking at buying, I mean, herbs from China and India, I mean, they have so many contaminants. You really have to be careful with what products you're consuming. And just because it's, GCM certified or these different certifications, it doesn't mean that it's tested for a certain amount of cleanliness. You have to be really know your company, know your products. Listen, we test every batch. So a lot of companies say, oh, this we tested once. But a lot of the stuff that comes in, certain batches are clean, certain batches are not. So be careful.
I'll say one more thing, then I'll let Steve jump in. A lot of these ingredient suppliers from China, I do this for a living, right? I formulate supplements. They're literally like Coke dealers, right? So you'll say, hey, I'm interested in, your spirulina. And they'll say, oh, friend, we send you sample, highest quality product. That 100-gram sample they send you, it's going to be the highest quality stuff you've ever got. You're going to third-party test it. It's going to be 99% pure. It's going to be perfect. And then you put in a purchase order for, 20 kilograms, and they send you absolute crap.
Yeah, it's so true. And by the way, I'm not against Chlorella. I'm not against any of those things. But when people are trying to use like Chlorella or some of these other herbal binders as chelators, that's not a good thing. Chlorella has other great benefits. You can have a clean one. So does spirulina. But they're just weak binders, and people take them thinking, oh, I did some heavy metal detox. They took Chlorella for 3 months, and look, it took me years to get the mercury out of the brain. It bioaccumulated. Listen, the first place of exposure is in utero. There's a study called the Drash study. It was one of the first studies to show this, but the number of fillings, ladies, in your mouth, according to the study, is proportional to how much on autopsies they find in babies' brains. So there's a correlation, the number of fillings and how much in utero the baby's exposed to. Oh, and then the number of fillings in your mouth is proportional to how much we find in your brain. And look, it's years. It turns to inorganic mercury. So the vapor goes across. It turns to inorganic mercury, and there it's locked for life unless you do the right protocol to get it out. So my detox protocol, we start with a preparatory phase where we open up the downstream pathways like your gut, your liver, your kidneys. Then we start regulating the cell function again, get that going. And then we go into a body phase where we just try to get the easy to get toxins. And then the magic happens in the brain phase. And that's where we go after the deep tissue. Lead gets stored in the bone very deeply, takes years to get out, and mercury in the brain and nerve tissue. So yeah, I mean, detox done right is my big passion, obviously, because that's how I got my life back. So anyways, but it's more than that. I teach more than that. I teach different things, fasting strategies. I have a multi-therapeutic approach that I teach doctors that I have for years. Fasting, my diet variation, my new book coming out called Beyond Fasting, and how we incorporate all of that with my cellular detox is what my passion is.
So before we get into all that stuff, I just want to summarize really quick, because in the United States, a lot of us have like crazy high deductibles. A lot of us, you go to a naturopath, a holistic doctor, Eastern doctor, it's not even covered under insurance, so we have to pay out of pocket. Can you kind of like go back and just like kind of say, if we want to get tested for this stuff, who do we exactly need to go to? Because a lot of these holistic doctors that I've been to, they're clueless. They just know how to like stick you with some needles, and they don't know anything about shit, And so if I were to go to them, you just spend like $150 to see them, and then they wouldn't even know. So is there someone specific that we can kind of Google, look up, that would be able to knock these tests out for us accurately?
If you go to my website, we have a list of doctors. We can connect you to some of the doctors that I trained. That's the easiest way. And I'll tell you, you're 100% right. Functional medicine doctors, you know what they've turned into today? Other natural pill pushers. And listen, there's a time and a place even for a medication, right? But now they're running all these expensive tests. Oh, the new fad is the genetic test. And then they give you all this stuff based on your genetics. Look, I've interviewed some of the top scientists on this whole area of SNPs and genetics. It gives us clues, but I can tell you it has failed as far as, treating people. You don't treat genes, you treat humans, right? And it's like when we're looking at people now are identifying themselves. I have I'm homozygous MTHFR, and they're identifying themselves as these genes. The fact is via something called epigenetics, meaning our body can go around these SNPs and weaknesses. It's that smart. So, 10 years ago, I too was excited about all the gene testing, but I can tell you clinically, in working with hundreds of doctors, it's not the answer. So running expensive tests and just taking a lot of supplements, look, the key is getting upstream to the cause. If you have these hidden infections, if you have mercury in your teeth and that's vaporizing mercury, and it does the life of that filling into your brain, how are you going to get well? You might get well for a short period of time, but then all of a sudden you end up with other issues, other problems. It's not lasting. So you have to get upstream to the causative factors. That's what I teach. That's the key. That's how I got my life back. I didn't get my life back by taking a bunch of supplements and running a bunch of tests, honestly. And there's a time and a place for all of it. But the fact is, you have to go upstream to cause. Doctors, even alternative, are not doing that today.
I agree completely with what you said about the genetic testing. Another thing that people forget to think about is that there's 100 times more genetic information in the bacteria in your body than your own DNA. Only 3% of the proteins in your body are coded for your own DNA. 97% are the bacteria in your body. So even if you find out your own genes, you're kind of figuring out 1% of the equation, right? So it's kind of, as cool and as sexy and as exciting as it sounds, it's kind of asking the wrong question, in my opinion.
No, I agree. It is sexy. It is, my doctor put me on this special diet based on my genetics. Good luck with that. But yeah, it's sexy right now. So just, be aware that there's a lot of hype.
It's kind of like the blood type diet when that first came out, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I can understand where the idea could come from, and like, I don't think it's a stupid idea, but when you actually analyze human physiology, it doesn't make much sense. But the idea and the thought process isn't stupid, but it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, that's true.
So go ahead, Trevor. What's the next topic you want to talk about, Trevor, before we get into the next one?
So the real reason I want to get you on, Dr. Daniel Pompa, is that you're very well educated, but you're also open-minded. And one problem we have is that I feel like a lot of experts reside in one camp, right? They're the keto camp, and that's all they recommend, or they're the vegan camp, and that's all they recommend. And especially now with documentaries like What the Health coming out on Netflix, people watch a documentary like that, they get so influenced by it that vegan almost becomes like a religion for them, right?
True.
So I want to get your thoughts on, what are your thoughts on all of this? Like, what do you think the best diet approach is? Do you think vegan diets are healthy? Do you think ketogenic diets are healthy? Like, if someone came to you and said, hey, I want to look great, I want to feel great, what diet should I eat? What would be some tips you would give them?
Oh man, I love this topic, right? Because you're right? Everyone lines up in a camp, right? We have our keto people, paleo, vegans, vegetarians, all of it. There's even the carnivore diet's getting popular. And these things come in and out of vogue, right? And people pretty much are in the camp they're in because they went vegan and, oh my God, I felt so much better and it helped me. So therefore they're now vegans. Or I went paleo. I can pick on any of the diets. My feeling is they're all great. The key is, and this is not even my opinion, there's so much science around this, and I discuss it in my book. It's like, look, the key is switching diets. I've been in some, ancient cultures, and they never are on one diet. They're always forced, whether it's environmental factors, lack of food, who knows, but they're always forced to change diet. Science shows that changing diet actually forces your microbiome, that's your gut bacteria that you mentioned earlier, right? And other factors. It forces your body to have to adapt. And that adaptation, as it turns out, is the magic to this hormone optimization that occurs. So one thing that we do in my doctor group is we move people out of different diets seasonally. We also do it monthly, and we also do it weekly. And I can discuss those different strategies. But the point is this, is you stay on a vegan diet, you stay on that long, your genetics will determine when you get sick. Stay on a paleo diet. And there's all the research on there. The high protein can cause all these different problems, age you prematurely. They're right. But moving in and out of paleo is actually really good. Ketosis. You have all these people that are really excited about ketosis. I love ketosis, but I never stay in ketosis. When you look at ancient cultures, they were never in ketosis. The moment they had, healthy carbohydrates, they were eating them, right? The Hunza people, a tribe that I visited in Africa, right? So, why? Because they want to survive. You know, they're going to be attracted to the fruit when they had it, or the vegetables, you know, different vegetables when they had it. In the harsh winters, of course, they were going to be eating fats and meats and whatever they had at that time. The point is this: now we can look and realize that our bodies thrive when we switch diets. So the magic isn't the diet. The magic is actually alternating and switching diets and driving adaptation, which creates a hormone optimization. So that's really the answer to the question. So what do we do when I get someone who's challenged? You know, I will change their diet around, and we listen to the body. I'm not going to give them foods that their body is intolerant to at that time. However, I still change the diet. I may move them into ketosis, but I'll move them back out of ketosis in a few months, create that dietary shift. So there lies the magic, Trevor.
You just broke the hearts of all these diet gurus and guys on social media who say you're supposed to eat chicken, rice, and broccoli 10 times a day, every day.
You see, when we look at what Americans eat, right? Okay, the vegan, the paleo, they're eating the same 6 to 8 foods. And there's nothing really more damaging than that, especially for your gut bacteria. We know that when you alter diets, you know, even seasonally, it really creates a diversity in your gut, which, as Trevor, as you pointed out, affects all of the cells in your body. It affects how your brain works. It affects your immune system. We need this diversity. Well, we don't gain diversity by taking pills. And I'm not against taking different bacteria pills, but I can tell you this, as a group of doctors, we would all say the same thing. We don't fix these terrible guts by giving you bacteria. We fix them by these diverse strategies that we use with diet variation. That's what I call my principles: diet variation and feast-famine cycles. So we emulate what ancient cultures do. So we put you in times of feast and times of famine. We change the foods that we do that with. We fast you during times. We have feast times. We do that weekly, monthly, and seasonally. So, you know, those strategies are what we do to really get your body to adapt. And through that adaptation, you know, the best for your audience, you know, the best example I can give everyone listening: exercise. All of you listening know this, right? Is if you do the same exercise all the time, you not only plateau, you adapt to that exercise. And when you adapt, you actually start to lose, you know, the function. You actually start to lose results. Oh, and then you change your workout. Now all of a sudden you do the new thing, but everyone thinks, oh, it's this new thing that's so great. No, it's not the new thing. It was the change, right? Okay, now I'm doing TRX, and oh my gosh, my results. It's not the TRX. You're still just moving. What it is the change creates the body now. It forces your body to have to adapt to this new force, you know, and we know that. Bodybuilders, you know, have known this for years. This change forces the body to adapt. How does it adapt? It upregulates growth hormone. It makes your cells more sensitive to testosterone. This adaptation mechanism to survive creates the result. No different for our diet than it is for exercise.
That's really, really good advice, Dr. Daniel. And some of the things bodybuilders have been doing as well is cycling carbohydrates, right? And that almost gives you that feast and famine cycle. And that's something I noticed I did when I was 18, just because I was trying to quantify nutrition, right? And so I knew protein was important. Obviously, no one's going to debate protein is important. But then I thought, well, carbs are important because, you know, that's your body's immediate energy source that fills glycogen. There's also essential fatty acids. So what I would do is that on my workout days, I would eat more carbs and less fats. Then my rest days, I would eat more fats and less carbs. And I got great results doing that. It's the similar idea to, you know, cycling fast and famine. And I think a big problem people get into is that we're all creatures of habit, right? So people like to eat the same thing every day. They like to exercise the same way every day. Like, I'm in academia. If you go to the university, there's no assigned seatings. But it's creepy that you see the same person will sit in the same chair. They come at the same time with the same coffee. They'll eat an apple at exactly 12 o'clock. It's almost like that person is living Groundhog Day every single day.
Yeah.
And then if you go sit in that person's chair, they don't flip out, but they look at you like,
yeah, you're in my spot.
Yeah, right. It's like, it's the craziest thing. And the same thing with people, right? Like, so many people, they wake up at the same time. They go to Starbucks at 8 a.m. They get to work at 8:30. At 10 o'clock, they have a muffin and a coffee for snack break. At 12 o'clock, they go to the same restaurant for lunch. Like,
yeah,
it's insane.
You're right. It is funny, right? We have to force change or be forced. Today, unfortunately, we aren't forced to change our diet, right? We have the luxury of going to the grocery store and getting the same 8 foods, right? When you live out in the environment, it's a lot different. You're going to be forced to change your diet. Trust me. So, when you look at this, I fell victim to this, right? I mean, this is some years ago now, probably 10 years ago. And, the more I researched ketosis and, I fell in love with the whole concept of how ketones heal the brain. And they do. And they're so amazing for your microbiome. They can turn off bad genes. So, of course, I went all in ketosis. All of a sudden, I go, what the heck is going on? I'm getting belly fat. My lower abs are gone, right? Okay. And I'm getting some like love handles again. And, I'm like, okay, I'm going to drop my carbs more because see, that worked the first time. I got even leaner when I went into ketosis, right? And so I dropped my carbs down to 20 grams. Gosh, I think it's getting worse. 10 grams. I just got to be more disciplined. And yet I'm getting skinny fat. Now I notice I'm getting weaker in the gym, right? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute. There's something going on. And I happened upon someone, this article that low carb diets long-term can cause insulin resistance. And I was like, that's impossible. So I started digging more. Well, what I found was it causes insulin resistance, but it's not an insulin resistance like a diabetic. It's an insulin resistance that our cells literally cause to survive. Meaning, from the DNA of your cell, it'll literally blunt your insulin receptor. Why is it doing this? And it creates an insulin resistance, right? Meaning that insulin will help you store fat, right? It's a survival mechanism. Why is the body doing this? Well, it's obvious. All the body wants to do is survive and adapt. So what it's doing is when you restrict, your cells can only use 2 things for energy, sugar or fat. What you're doing in a low carb diet, paleo ketosis, you're forcing the cell to use fat. And then it makes these things called ketones that your brain can use, right? Great state to be in. However, what happens is the body's smart. It goes, okay, if fat is my only fuel, I'm going to just conserve this because I'm going to need to survive. And so what does it do? It blunts the insulin receptor to hold on to your fat. It wants to survive. Here's a great example. You live in the middle of the woods in Alaska. You have a wood pile that gets you through the winter, and you're basing the size of your wood pile on past winters. And this winter's worse. It's very cold. So all of a sudden you realize, I'm going through my wood. I'm not going to last. So what are you going to do? You're going to burn less wood. So now instead of keeping your cabin at 70, you're going to be happy with 60, maybe 50, whatever it's going to take to not let that wood pile burn out because you'll die. This is what your body's saying with its fat stores. I want to hold on to my fat. It's my only fuel. Now, a friend comes over and just happens to stop by and says, I have plenty of wood. Here, and he dumps you more wood. Now what are you going to do? You're going to go, okay, you know what? I can burn more wood now. Of course you are. You're going to bring her back up to 70. That's what happens when you do a carb day, even once a week. The bodybuilders, Trevor, to your point, figured this out. So now once a week you throw in the carbs. All you're doing is reminding the body it's not starving. That's it. The body goes, okay, I have plenty. So what does it do? It fires up the fat burning machine. 2 days after you do that, your ketones soar again because now your body's burning fat again. It's magic. And by the way, some people do better with 2 carb days a week. Women, the week before their period, we put in 5 to 7 days of higher healthy carbs. Hormonally, magic happens. All of a sudden now the intermittent fasting is working for them. Their low carb diet's working for them. Why? Week before their period does high carbs help them? Because you need insulin to make certain hormone conversions that women need a week before. All these hormones are needing to be converted. For example, thyroid hormones has to be converted into an active form, and you need insulin to make that conversion. So their body craves carbohydrates. When you give it to them, magic happens. So the point is this: weekly, monthly, and seasonal variation in the diet is magic.
We call that refeeding in fitness and bodybuilding. But like when you say carbs, what specifically do you mean by carbs? Because a lot of people listen to this and they'll say he's talking about it's okay for me to go eat a entire pizza once a week. But that's not what you're saying, right? What kind of carbs are you?
So I'm talking about, this is when you eat your sweet potatoes, yams. If you're going to eat more fruit, eat more fruit. If you're going to eat some, wild rice or ancient grains, eat them, right? That's the time to have your bowl of oatmeal. So yeah, you want to gravitate to the healthier carbs. I think the next question, Steve, will be, how many, right? Look, I mean, I think you'll find your magic, but for this to work, you typically have to get at least between 100, 200 grams of carbs a day, for that to be a feast day. Look, I'm going to say this too. Certain people with certain health conditions do better with high protein, and that works too. The body will take high protein and do some magic with it. But again, high protein all the time, it's bad. But periodically, your body can rev up a cycle called mTOR, and a pathway called mTOR, which long-term is destructive, but short-term healing occurs. So high protein or high carbs can be magic in varying in your diet.
This is what I found anecdotally with keto diets, and let me know your thoughts on this, Dr. Pompa, is that I think keto diets have their place. I think the two biggest mistakes people make is that, number one, they don't implement a high carb refeed day at least once per week. I find the more active you are and the leaner you are, the more high carb refeed days you'll do. So if you're a lean guy who's active pretty much every day, you might have to do 2 or 3 high carb refeeds. And then another big mistake I see people make is they think keto means calorie free. So they're adding, butter into their coffee, they're cooking everything in coconut oil, they're, loading avocado oil on everything, and they're not losing weight, even though they're following a keto diet. And the laws of the conservation of energy still matters, right? So even if you're in ketosis, if you're consuming way too many calories, you're not going to lose weight. So I think that's a big mistake too, is people, and this is partly because researchers, and marketers, they say, keto, fat burning, they kind of make you think that keto means calorie free, but calories still matter.
And here's a great way to think about calories, right? So we know that long-term caloric restriction doesn't work, meaning, okay, I'm gonna eat half my meal. Your metabolism goes down, down, down. It works in the beginning and then it stops working, and all of a sudden you're eating 500 calories going, I'm losing muscle and I'm gaining fat. It doesn't work. However, what does work is this. So when you look at ancient cultures, no doubt they take in less calories than we do. But how do they do it? They don't do it by just eating less, meaning pushing food away. They do it by eating less often. So you're right, Trevor. The key, calories do matter. But how do you, at the end of the day, take in less calories? Well, you do it by eating less often. But when you eat to full, because it's good to tell your body, we're not in a starvation mode. If you keep restricting your calories each meal, your body eventually think, okay, we're not getting enough food, and it'll slow the processes down of fat burning. But if you eat less often, and that's where intermittent fasting got popular, right? That's why when people do get results, because they're eating in a smaller eating window, and therefore they're benefiting from a fast, which we can talk about the benefits of fasting, and eating in a window. At the end of the day, you always eat less. So eat less, but eat less by eating less often is the message, because calories do matter. We know that if you eat less, you live longer, right? We know this, but eat less the way ancient people eat less.
I just this morning did a rant on exactly what you just said, and like every mod on our forum disagree with me, because I was telling people that eating in a 500 calorie deficit a day, losing a pound a week, if you're 200 pounds, after 200 weeks, you should weigh 0, according to their theory. But that's not the way it works. But they don't want to listen to that, because their idea, every time a fat person comes on the forum trying to lose weight, that's what they tell them. They eat in a deficit every day for the long term, because that's going to work. And I tell them that Weight Watchers, that's exactly what Weight Watchers is, and 95% of people fail on Weight Watchers. So it doesn't work. So this is like the argument I have with people every day that you're saying. So it's kind of funny having you on and actually reinforcing what I'm saying. Go ahead, Trevor.
It does work, but it works temporarily.
Exactly.
That's what I said this morning. I said it will only work temporarily. That's why you see
and by the way, that's why people are deceived, because they know I lost 10 pounds doing this, so I know it works, but it doesn't work long term, and that is the message that people have trouble with. Look, when we look at studies on living longer, we know that a 25 to 30% caloric restriction, it's, oh my gosh, in all these animal studies, it worked unbelievable. So we must just be gluttonous and we're eating too much. Well, the Biosphere 2 project, where they put 7 people, in a perfect ecosystem, and they called it the Biosphere. They restricted their calories 30% for 2 years. surely these people are going to come out healthier, better, amazing, right? It failed. They came out more unhealthy. They were catabolic, right? They were catabolic with fat on their belly. I mean, honestly, and that's exactly what happens. So what happened is their body went into this catabolic state. Now, some of the genes for longevity were turned on, but they became more, had more problems with their immune system. They became, infectious diseases became more of an issue, so it didn't work. Now, one of the gentlemen who was in the Biosphere 2 project, one of his students actually said, well, wait a minute, what if we did it short term? Instead of 2 years, what if we did shorter bursts of low calorie, emulating ancient cultures? This guy's name is Walter Longo, who I've been really privileged to work with their group because they just got $44 million to do more of these studies. So he showed that 5 days a month in caloric restriction works. So short term, to Trevor's point, actually not only works, it's actually proven to work. So it's not our opinion. So what happens when they restricted calories between 500 and 1,000 a day for 5 days, and then did regular caloric intake, and then the next month, another 5 days, and then the next month, another 5 days. Their first study they did was on rats. Type 1 diabetic rats, their pancreatic beta cells actually regenerated. That's how amazing it is by doing these short periods of caloric restriction. Now, why did that happen? In 2016, a gentleman won the Nobel Prize by a word called autophagy, meaning that what happens in a fasting state, even a caloric restricted state, which is still a partial fasting state, your body eats the bad cells, the cells that are living too long, the cells that are causing inflammation and mischief, the cells that aren't functioning correctly. The body's so smart that it will use those cells for extra energy that it needs to heal and to function. Now, here's the best part. What happens around day 3, day 4, day 5 of one of these types of fasts or caloric restricted times is the body upregulates stem cells to replace those cells that it used for energy. So now the stem cells actually do healing in the body, and that's why the beta cells in the rats regenerate. They're doing this exact study now on humans, and I can tell you clinically, we find that it works magic. Autoimmune, all these different conditions that we didn't have an answer for, these times of fasting states. Again, feast famine, we're emulating ancient cultures. So 5 days a month, that's a different story than long-term caloric restriction.
So I'll let Trevor jump in, but our 4 members are kind of blessed because I'm around and I've done these prolonged fasts. I actually logged daily my prolonged fast. I did a 19-day prolonged fast. I did a 10-day prolonged fast. I've done a 15-day prolonged fast. So I fast, pretty regularly. And one of the things that I found during my fast is during my fast, my blood pressure went sky high. My adrenaline went sky high. I felt my body was under tremendous stress. Then when I came off, I checked my numbers. Also during the fast, my white blood cells cratered. And then when I came off, everything went back to normal. And not only that, but my cholesterol dropped, my blood pressure dropped, everything, my heart rate dropped and everything. So it seems like during your fast, your numbers go crazy. Your body's in a tremendous stressed out state, and you're kind of training your body to become more healthy. And I find it like every time I get sick, all I do is just fast, and my sickness goes away while other people are taking antibiotics. So I found it to be a huge weapon. And a lot of bodybuilders are scared to fast because they're scared to lose their muscle. And could you kind of touch on that a little bit? Because that's the argument I hear. Everyone's afraid of losing their muscle. Oh my God, I'm going to lose a muscle.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that myth, right? And I just a month ago finished a 5-day water fast. I probably do 3 a year on average. Okay, so what happens in a fasting state? The body, you're right, you're creating a stress, and the body adapts hormonally. And you said your white blood cells tank. That was one of the criticisms years ago about fasting. Oh, it lowers your immune system because we see this white blood cell tank, happen. Well, we know scientifically what's happening because of a lot of Longo's work. What happens is through this autophagy process, the body eats up all these white blood cells that are living too long. We call it cell senescence. Not only they live too long, but they're the ones driving chronic inflammation. And all of us, they just live too long and they cause mischief and they cause a hyperimmunity. So many of us have low-grade autoimmune where the body's creating these overreactions. And it's these older cells. Well, during a fast, your body gets rid of those. That's why fasting is magic for chronic inflammation, autoimmune, so because it gets rid of these overactive old white blood cells. But here's the best part. What happens is the stem cells, you said your cells came right back up. Your stem cells create new white blood cells, more naive. They're not driving inflammation. They're young and healthy and not overreacting. So what happens then is we downregulate the autoimmune, the food allergies, the seasonal allergies. We get this downregulation of the bad immune system and an upregulation of a healthy immune system. So, that's what happens in a fasting state. Let's talk about the muscle myth, right? So let me tell you, my wife, at my seminars, I always show a picture of her, and she's 51 and she's muscular. And she'll tell you the difference, how she gained that muscle was nothing workout wise. She didn't change anything there. It was when she started fasting more frequently. Now, how is that possible? Well, your muscle is like the white blood cells. You end up having a lot of old cells in your muscle that doesn't recover. As we know, the key is not what you do in the gym, it's the recovery, right? So these older cells, they're not recovering. Therefore, your workouts are not working the way they should because you're not recovering the same. After a fast, your body uses those old muscle cells for the energy that it needs. It needs those amino acids. It takes them from those old cells. What does it do? It raises up your stem cells and it starts replacing those muscle cells with newer cells, just like your immune system. Now, a month later, what happens is you created new cells and now you're recovering and you actually gain muscle. It's classic. I mean, we are meant in our DNA to fast. Fasting will gain muscle a month later because you have new muscle cells that recover faster. Simple as that. Your immune system a month later, better because you've gained new immune cells via this autophagy stem cell reaction. Do not be afraid to fast. Listen, your body goes into about a 24-hour period where it'll use a little bit of muscle. It immediately crosses out of that, and now it's using all of your bad cells, and it's using all of your fat, and fat adapts within at least 2 or 3 days. But maybe one day where you'll eat some of the muscle. And what studies found, it's eating the bad muscle anyway. So the bottom line is that's a myth. It's not true. Your body's meant to fast.
Let me just say this, and I'll let Trevor jump in. I think what the thing a lot of people get confused about, because if you look at my log, my muscles did flatten out over the 19 days. 2 days after I came off my fast, they filled right back up again with the glycogen. So people are confusing water retention and glycogen in the muscles with muscle being lost. And that's, I think, where the confusion comes from. But it's not losing actual muscle tissue. So that's, I think, where the confusion comes from.
Well, and again, if you do lose muscle tissue, it's cells that you needed to get rid of.
Exactly.
They're hindering your recovery. And then your stem cells raise up. And that's why we do 5-day fast, by the way, because you get the maximum stem cell rise around 5 days. And growth hormone rise, by the way. It uses growth hormone to keep your muscle. That's part of the adaptation. Your body wants to survive. Remember, I said that earlier. Well, it needs muscle to run from a lion. So it doesn't want to use its muscle. It wants to use all of its bad tissue. So it raises up growth hormone, makes you more sensitive to testosterone to keep its muscle for that very reason. So therefore, it's smart enough to know, don't take the bad flesh, the good flesh, only eat the bad. So you're right on. The visual flattening you see is glycogen loss. Simple, and you're 100% right. But if you do have any tissue loss, it's a good thing. And a month later, you'll gain good tissue. It's a magic. I'm telling you, it really is.
I kind of want to ask you one more thing about fasting, and I'll let Trevor jump in. I'm sorry. When I did my 19-day, I did take electrolytes during my fast. And I did work out during my fast. I know if you're trying to heal from an injury, you probably don't want to work out the way I did because I worked out every day. But like electrolytes, I really did feel like I still had the benefits even with the electrolytes. What's your position on that?
Yeah, I think electrolytes, the first 3 days of a fast, you dump a lot of fluid and glycogen, right? And you lose electrolytes. So taking even some sea salt, 2 to 4 teaspoons a day will maintain your electrolytes, or just take some electrolytes. It will help you. Once you're a seasoned faster, you realize, I really, don't really need to take electrolytes. I don't have to anymore. But when you go an extended fast like you did, it's recommended just because it does make it a little easier. And again, I recommend extended fasting, especially if you have more body tissue, right? Someone that's smaller, multiple shorter fasts work better for them, but there is a benefit to longer fasts. And I do a class on how to know when to even break a fast. I had a gentleman at one of my seminars. He was obese. He was over 400 pounds. He was on 120 days of just water. Now he was on 14 medications. He basically was told, you're going to die. He was a mess. Every one of his blood markers were basically showing death. At that point, he was off all of his medication, and his doctor was supervising the fast, obviously. But 120 days of just water, and he was off. Oh, and by the way, his blood markers were perfect. His nutrition markers that they measured in the beginning, absolutely spot on. So what was happening? Where was his body getting nutrition? From his flesh, right? His body was eating through autophagy all of the bad tissue, and it was, providing perfectly the nutrition he needed. But it healed him. The longest fast recorded in modern day is it's a Scotsman. He fasted 389 days, something like that. I may have it slightly off. Maybe it's 84, but and he lost hundreds of pounds, and anyways, big success story there as well.
The guy who fasted 120 days, what was his first meal?
Yeah, I don't know, but I did teach him how to break the fast correctly. He wasn't my client or patient, but yeah, he did. There's a proper way to break a fast. You don't just go, okay, I'm going to eat the steak. Your HCl, your hydrochloric acid in your stomach is very low. Your microbiome has to readjust. So you go very slow with some avocado, just some very light foods. Cooked vegetables are easier to digest than raw. Some blended things are actually a nice way to break a fast too.
Just make sure you hire a maid for the day you break your fast, because I needed one after that, because everything just went right through me that first day. So.
Yeah.
Well, I could see someone, doing a 120-day fast and be like, okay, I'm going to go to Pizza Hut. I'm going to reward myself.
You'll get sick.
So,
yeah. And you don't want to do that, because you'll break your body. Your body's ripe with all these new stem cells, and it's healing. If you shock the body like that, you stop that healing, and that's not good. So I always tell people, look, don't waste the fast. Don't waste the fast, please.
So how often should we do like those 5-day prolonged fasts as athletes? Like, is it like a couple times a year?
Yeah. So, I think the average person, even fasting once a year, the Hunza people, one of the longest living healthy tribes on the planet, they had fasting spring every spring. Now they were forced to fast. And at one point they really weren't forced to fast, but it became a cultural thing that was fasting. And they really attribute their long life and health to the fast. So even one a year is life-changing. However, for more challenged conditions, we fast people sometimes once a month. And a lot of times we do the partial fast. And Dr. Walter Longo developed the fasting mimicking diet, the prolonged fast. I think you just said that word, which here's box one. It's like 500 to 800 calories, for the day. Here's your food. Here's day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. It's a 5-day fast in a box. And it's they call it the fasting mimicking diet, which it's a partial fast in the sense of you have to get protein below 20 grams. Otherwise you break out of this autophagy, and you have to get calories under 1,000. Otherwise you'll break out of the autophagy state. So oftentimes we'll start with one of these types of fasts, and then later we can move to water fasting if we feel that's necessary. But maybe even once a quarter doing a fast. I fast probably, like I said, 3-4 times a year, maybe 2 water fasts, 2 partial fasts. I did one of those fasting mimicking diets with the boxed food. I did that, not the last fast. I did pure water, but the one before that.
So I got 2 more questions for you, Dr. Pompa. We're close to our hour here. So if someone wants to, let's say, do a 5-day fast once per year, would there be a specific time you'd recommend? I know traditional Chinese medicine recommends detox in the spring. So is that something you would align with? Maybe do your 5-day fast in the spring?
I mean, I think that is if I had to pick one time, that would be the ultimate time. Based on ancient cultures, I mean, that's when the fast typically occurred. I think you'll benefit anytime. I like to fast January or February just because I don't know. It's like one of those things you start your year off with, but I typically do a spring fast as well.
Okay. And then my second question is because a lot of people listening to this podcast are interested in weight loss, right? They've tried the eat less, exercise more. That doesn't work. My theory, and this is something I've just thought about myself, is that if you look at cultures who are lean, you have like the French culture, they eat less, exercise less, right? They don't really exercise very much, especially in Europe. If you go to Europe, no one's jogging. Like you'll never see people jog, right? People walk everywhere, but they don't really eat that much. If you ever go for dinner in Europe, like it's not a massive portion. So that's eat less, exercise less. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have eat more, exercise more. And that would be, like Michael Phelps, your favorite athlete, who you see, eats 10,000 calories per day, but is also exercising, 10 hours per day. So would you recommend, because we know eat less, exercise more doesn't work, would you recommend someone maybe cycling between those? Like on the days you exercise, eat more, and then the days you don't exercise, eat less? Would that kind of be the best way to go about it?
Absolutely. Because even without trying to do that, that's happens, right? If I exercise this morning, I invariably do a hard exercise, right? A more intense exercise. I invariably get hungrier earlier, right? I mean, I intermittent fast, so I haven't eaten today yet. I probably won't eat until maybe 3 o'clock. I didn't exercise today, but let's say I did. No doubt my afternoon meal will be bigger. I'll be more hungry, and I listen to my body, right? And days I don't work out, I will eat 1 meal a day. Oftentimes, I'm just simply not hungry. So I eat less, but I definitely do it by eating less often and listening to my body. When you look at the, Europe culture, which, I spent, some time there, their breakfast is hardly a breakfast at all, right? That's the continental breakfast, right? Americans, we go there and like, really? This is breakfast? Are you kidding? It's a cup of coffee and if anything, a piece of cheese or a Danish. I mean, it's like nothing, right? So, and then they typically don't even eat until dinner. And then their dinner that's the meal, right? It typically lasts a few hours. It's very social, right? I mean, that's the Italian way. That's my culture. We went with a good friend of mine last year. We went to Italy with him. He drank espresso in the morning. We were out the door. He didn't even know about intermittent fasting. Had never heard the word, but this is what he did. But then we ate this big dinner that lasted 3 hours, right? By the way, the tribe that I visited in Africa was the same thing. The men went out hunting all day. The women were gathering. They were gone until the afternoon. They didn't eat anything. The whole time they were tracking animals. They ate nothing because it slows them down. And then they came back and it was a 3-4 hour feast, with the tribe. And that's the way really our bodies are set up to do it. So at the end of the day, we do eat less. You get your body, even when I do eat, I eat to full. But when I haven't eaten all day because I've been fasting, you fill up faster. So you eat less. And that's why the French and the Italians eat less, is because they really they can't eat a lot, right? I mean, they're eating to full. Trust me, they are. Otherwise it wouldn't work. So eat less often and it'll allow you to eat less.
So, I mean, I try to stress to people, they don't have to eat like 8 meals a day to build muscle, but they don't seem to want to accept that for some reason. I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure what started the whole you got to eat every 2 hours to build muscle or lose weight. This is the funny one. The funniest one is you have to eat every 2 hours or your metabolism will slow down and you'll gain weight. I love that one, by the way. Because in America, we eat too less in America, like you said, we go to IHOP or Denny's, we eat too less.
Well, let's talk about the muscle gain thing, because a lot of bodybuilders now are learning to eat in a smaller window. But let's face it though, if you want to put on an abnormal amount of muscle, you have to do some abnormal things. I mentioned earlier, we have the autophagy pathway where your body will eat bad cells, but there's an opposing pathway called mTOR. mTOR gets a bad rap because mTOR, if you're in this pathway too long, you age prematurely, which is true. But short bursts of mTOR actually can be very healing. But bodybuilders want to be in this mTOR pathway all the time. Why? Because it is not a catabolic pathway, it's an anabolic pathway. Your body builds tissue, creates new cells. So this is how they create new muscle, right? And so what are the things that stimulate this mTOR pathway? High calories, which is not good long-term. We talked about that. High protein, not good long-term. And high carbohydrates. Okay, so all of that stimulates mTOR, which will put on muscle. So if you want to put on muscle, that's where eating every 2 hours, eating, because it stimulates this mTOR pathway and you can put on muscle. Is it healthy? No. Does it work? Every bodybuilder would tell you it does. And again, there's a lot of myths around that. You're going to lower your metabolism. That's not true. But it does. Higher calories, higher protein, higher carbs can all help to put on muscle because it stimulates mTOR. Now, what if we wanted to do it more healthy? What if we did it doing it in a more structured way in a smaller eating window? Then you get this hormone rise. You don't have to eat as many calories, so therefore it's healthier. You don't have to throw a bunch of protein down. However, I'll say this. Bodybuilders, let's say they're eating in a 6 to 8 hour window. They still have to eat more calories in that window, and they're going to put on more muscle. So if you're interested in putting on an abnormal amount of muscle, you're going to have to do things that aren't as healthy. I mean, you understand, Steve, there's this dichotomy of if you want to live long, you're not going to have to eat all these calories, or you shouldn't eat all these calories. But if you want to put muscle on, do it, but please do it in a window.
Yeah, I love what you said. And I kind of realized this when I was 20 is because I used to compete in bodybuilding shows. I actually have my pro card in bodybuilding. And I was always interested in research, right? So I knew mTOR is important for muscle building. So I'd go on PubMed and search mTOR, and I'd find all of these studies about muscle building, and then all of these studies about premature aging. So I was like, well, this sucks. I'm going to look great, but I'm going to die early. And there's kind of like a spectrum, right? What's really good for bodybuilding generally is bad for your health. Tons of food, tons of drugs, tons of excessive weight training. Let's face it, like if you really want to be a good bodybuilder, you're going to die early. And that's
the average age. 63, the average bodybuilders, that's what they live to. I realized that's 15 years early death.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then there's the other spectrum. What's good for bodybuilding is, long-term fasting, low-caloric diets, lots of cardio, things like that, which is kind of the opposite spectrum, right? So you kind of want to be like somewhere in the middle, and that's going to give you the best of both things, right? You're going to feel good, you're going to not die, and you're still going to have a nice physique.
Trevor, here, you said it best. Look, you have both sides of the spectrum, right? You have your vegans and, some of these people over here, and they fast too much. They're too low calories, too much autophagy. It's no good. You can spot the people a mile away. They look catabolic, right? They're over here too much. And then you have your bodybuilders over here that, this is no good either. So again, what are we doing? It's feast and famine. The magic is both. I would argue this is too bad. Too much of this is bad. Too much of this is bad. You want both, feast and famine. And I talk about that in my book because my feast famine cycles is the magic.
And exactly.
It's like a balance. It's just like anything in life. You got to be balanced. It's just like the seasons change, every 3 months the seasons change, the same thing. It's all about balance on each side. But like if you're a bodybuilder and you're like 300 pounds and you're huge, fast like for 5 days, give your body a little boost, and then go back to what you were doing.
Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say.
If these guys have done that, they'd probably still be alive.
Absolutely. I believe you could still even hold on to more muscle than would be considered normal. You can do it healthy if you follow these principles. Feast and famine, cycle it, diet variation, do it all. But you still need this autophagy pathway. You do.
So we're out of time, doctor, but we really appreciate you coming on. I really want to get your book for sure. Where can I get your book? Is it on Amazon?
Yeah, you know what? It's released next week at my seminar. So we're doing kind of a soft launch because I wanted to release at my seminar. And then the hardcover book will be out a month after that. I think I'm speaking of PaleoFX. I think I'm launching that there. But Beyond Fasting, look for it. It will be on Amazon probably in about a month. So.
And then what about your website or all your other books?
Yeah, my website's DR, like Dr. DR, and then my last name, Pompa. So drpompa.com. You can go to my podcast, Cellular Healing TV. I talk about all these things even on my Facebook. You can access it there as well.
So if I put your website in the show notes, would that have landing pages to your Facebook and everything?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So drpompa.com, it'll bring you to all those things.
For all of our listeners, I'll have Dr. Pompa's website in the show notes, so you can just check that out and click it. Dr. Pompa, I really appreciate you coming on. This is a really, really interesting episode. Lots of really good quantitative information. For your host, Trevor Kouritzin, my co-host, Steve Smee, this has been another episode of Evolutionary Radio. Live your life, look good doing it. Thanks for listening.